Darren Rudkin. Thanks for joining the latest in our Purposeful Work series, where we are meeting with purpose pioneers, leaders and business people who are really looking to change the way the world of work looks by using the power of purpose. And today you find me here in Copenhagen. We have a beautiful day for it, and we're here to meet the leaders who are responsible for transforming one of Denmark's grand business institutions, which is Danske Bank. You can see the building in the background behind me. Now, Danske Bank is held in very, very high esteem here in Denmark. I mean, when I think of Danish business, or at least in the past, the names that would come to mind for me, like Lego, Novo Nordisk, or Bang & Olufsen. But here in Denmark, it's this institution which is held in the highest of esteem. And it's really a pillar which for the Danes represents a sense of who they are, a sense of their values. So you can imagine what a shock it's been, not just to this institution, but to Denmark, for Danske Bank to have been embroiled in a series of scandals, including most recently possibly the world's biggest money laundering scandal, which is only just being resolved. So I'm here today to meet the leaders who are responsible for not just turning around and transforming the performance of this bank, but actually transforming its reputation, its esteem, how it's held in society and how it's held by the people who work here. And so we're going to be meeting leaders who are really about using purpose, using consciousness to change the culture inside the bank, the leadership of the bank, the strategy of the bank. And we're going to be exploring with them what role purpose is playing in them really making a difference in this grand old institution. So follow me. So we're here in Danske Bank offices, Carsten. Thanks so much for giving this interview. Really appreciate it.
Great to have you here.
Would you mind just starting off by, I mean, here you are, you're CEO of this old institution, this bank. How did you get to be here?
Yeah, it's a good question. It sort of just happened. No, I spent a lot of my career outside of Denmark. I am Danish, but I've spent 17 years outside of Denmark. I worked at GE Capital, I worked at Barclays, and then I got a call to come back and be part of the executive committee at Danske just about 6 years ago. And I have an Austrian wife. My kids were born in London, so it wasn't necessarily in the master plan to come back to Denmark. But I got the job offer, and I thought, look, it sounds like a really interesting job to be part of the executive leadership of Denmark's biggest bank by far. We're 152 years old. We've been a really important part of Danish society, of building out, Danish commerce from a agricultural country to an industry nation to now a wealthy, well-functioning society. And, Danske Bank has been part of that. And I thought that for me was hugely interesting. And then, 2 years ago, I got a call from the chairman who asked if I wanted to be the CEO. And I had a weekend to think about it.
Big weekend.
It was a big weekend because being the CEO of Danske Bank here in Denmark is not only is it a huge job and it's a huge amount of responsibility, but it's also a very visible job. There's lots of scrutiny around it. Danske Bank has been through highs and lows. Probably come back to that. So here I am. I said yes, and here I am 2 years later. I've been here 6 years in all, and 2 years as CEO.
You can really feel your sense of the there's a responsibility of the role. It's like really sort of very apparent in you, energetic in you.
Yeah, it's, Danske Bank is, it's a $500 billion balance sheet. And I say that because Denmark's GDP is just over $300 billion.
Wow.
So Danske Bank, also compared to the size of GDP, the country, it's a big deal, right? And it's a responsibility I don't take lightly. When I came back, one of the things was, look, I really actually think I can make a difference coming to Danske Bank, being part of the then executive leadership team. If the central bank have a question around what's happening, if government have a question about what's happening in financial services, they'll come to Danske Bank and ask. So you really have an opportunity to make a difference on so many areas. So that does excite me, right? And then in general, I think financial services is hugely interesting because you really do get involved in so many different things, and you really are a part of everything that's happening in sort of the economy.
When you, in that fateful weekend, and you said yes, and you took the job, I mean, you've been going for 2 years now, but if you wind the clock back those 2 years, when you took it on, what were you thinking were the main challenges that you faced as CEO of Danske Bank?
You know what, I actually had, I'm a bit like that. I had 2 lists when I got asked. I had a list that said, these are all the reasons that I should say yes to the job. And it was some of the things I talked about that, I came originally to make a difference. I can make no bigger difference than if I'm the CEO. It's a huge opportunity. You get involved in so many things. And then the list of the reason not to do it was it's a big responsibility. What if I fail? What if this doesn't work out? It's a huge thing, both for my family, for me, etc. And those were the things I sort of, battled. I think deep inside I knew, of course, I'm going to do this. I want to do this. It's a huge opportunity. I can make a huge difference. But those are the things that went through my mind. At the same time as well, when I took over, I was the 4th CEO in 5 years. So Danske Bank has been through, an incredible amount of change. We had a big money laundering scandal. We had some other conduct cases. The share price had, fallen by more than 50%. A lot of scrutiny in society around the bank, and some of the things that we'd done wrong and stuff like that. So it wasn't just like business as usual. It was also taking over a bank as the 4th CEO, and again in 5 years. And today we're actually a different place 2 years later. But at that point, it was still uncertain, how big is this money laundering fine going to be? Is Danske Bank going to be able to get back on track with our customers? Are the financials going to come back on track? Is there more stuff to come? So yeah, not only was it a decision I really had to think about personally, in terms of, is this what I want? Is this good for my family? But it was also, am I going to be able to really pull this off and help take the bank to the next step? Obviously, verdict is still out on that, but we're 2 years on at least.
Well, at least now it's 4 CEOs in 2 more years.
That's right.
7 years. So extending that.
I joke because last week I had my 2-year anniversary, 19th of April, and I've sort of been joking that I've now lasted longer than quite a few of my predecessors. So.
But thanks for taking us into that, Carsten, because you do get the humanity of it is that you're asked to do this, and you've got on one side you've got this big list of why and the motivation to make a difference, but in a very human sense, you've got the other side of your list, which I would just say is like fear of failure.
Yeah.
Fear that you're not going to be up to the job. Fear that you're just going to be number 5 in this list of short tenured. So you come in with that human stuff rolling inside you. I mean, I imagine that's going to have an impact on how you start the job.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually remember, the first day on the job, I was doing a global town hall, right, saying goodbye to the previous CEO, and I was actually very open with the story about my list, and I was very open with the fact that look, I had the weekend to think about this, and it's a huge opportunity. I'm excited, but I also thought about what if I can't pull this off. And I actually had a lot of feedback from colleagues since then saying it was quite refreshing to hear that you're honest about that, that you do have a fear of failure, that you do, that you think about these things, that you don't just take it and actually the chairman said the same thing when I said I had to think about it when he called on. He was like, okay, it's actually nice that you're going to think about it. Most guys might just have said, yes, thank you very much. But yeah, I mean that is part of it. And I think I try actually to, and I've found increasingly in my many experiences as a leader and in interactions, is that the more you can open up a little bit around how you actually feel and create that vulnerability, the more you can also build connections, and that's actually been a big part of what I've been trying to think more about and bring more to life in my own leadership, both before but particularly also in the last couple of years as CEO.
I mean, you've really had a purpose to be real, haven't you, to be authentic. I mean, we've talked about it many times, but you said from the very start you didn't want to give off this kind of false persona that, yeah, I'm just taking the job, and yeah, we're just going to do it, and it's business as usual. You were very clear about that, weren't you? I'm going to bring my humanity, my vulnerability, my fear. I'm going to actually talk about that, not to overdo it either, but just to say, look, here I am, like the rest of you. I have these things, and this is how I'm working on it. This is how I'm working on myself.
Absolutely. And look, I think when I'm asked, what do you think is the most important thing as a CEO? For me, it's how do you create an environment where you can create a place where people want to come to work, where they really feel that it's fun, it's exciting, there is a purpose, and that they feel that the people that they work for, they trust, they want to follow. And the way you do that is that you need to be able to show something of yourself. You need to be able to create connections. And that does matter. It starts from your own team, which I think is the most potential important, is building your own executive leadership team. And it goes on all the ways in the organization, right? How do you build the best teams that function together, that work well together? That comes back to, I think, how you are as a leader, how you share things as a leader, how the environment you create, the culture that you create. So this saying around sort of, leaders help shape the culture, and culture is what shapes the organization. I really, that's really something I buy huge into, and I would describe it like that, if you will.
Well, let's come into that. We're going to drill deeper into that, but I just wanted to pick up on, if you like, the start of your story, because this film is not an obituary. It's not a case study. It's like, it comes at a point in time where hopefully, who knows, hopefully you're quite early in your journey. But I just wanted to re-emphasize to the viewer that when you came in as the new CEO, it was not business as usual. You had engagement in the bank was really low. It was low, it was going down. You had what some commentators describe as the world's biggest money laundering scandal on your hands. You were right in the midst of it. So these things you're talking about, openness and culture, and so really you've had the challenge of transforming this bank. That's what you're in, isn't it? That's the challenge you're in.
Yeah. No, I sort of sometimes joke, going back to your comment. Hopefully, I'm here for many years yet, right? I mean, the average span, I think, of a S&P 500 CEO is 4.9 years. So I feel like I'm maybe already halfway with my 2 years. But no, we have definitely been on a journey where it was not business as usual, and where we had to transform so many things. And I actually don't think I've thought that much about it. I mean, of course, I've been cognizant that employee engagement was low, and that there was a lot of management turnover, and there was a lot of distrust from investors, from the outside world. In retrospect, now that you asked the question that way, I'm not sure I've thought that much about that. I've more thought about, what is it that we need to do together as a team to get back and sort of win out there in the marketplace with our customers, to regain trust. And it's interesting, I've spent most of my career in risk management within banking. Usually you're sort of, when you're the risk manager, you're always seen as the guy that's sort of looking at the glass half empty. And I think, I've been looking at the glass half full, and really, I think trying to, of course, there's times when I go to bed at night and think, is this ever going to work? Are we ever going to succeed? But pretty much most mornings I'll wake up again and just focus on what is it that we need to do, and not so much around, how challenging is it, if you will.
What could go wrong?
Yeah.
How do I mitigate that?
Yeah.
It's like a line of thinking, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a big shift I think I've made myself as I went into the CEO role.
Yeah.
Is I just don't see a lot of upside in analyzing what can go wrong too much. Of course, you need the classic risk management scenarios and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, looking ahead and glass half full, and what are the opportunities, and how do we actually get there?
And in this journey of transformation, when did you start getting curious about purpose and about what it is and how you can work with it as a leader or as a human being?
I would say that if you ask me about purpose and what do I want to do, and do I want to make a difference, 23 years ago when I started in banking, I would have sort of said, what are you on about? I mean, I want to get a good job. I want to earn some good money. I want to see the world. I want to travel. I want to have a great career. And
but that is a purpose, isn't it?
And you could say that's a purpose. It's just very narrow, right?
Yeah.
And maybe sort of very sort of focused on yourself, right?
Uh-huh.
And I would say probably in the last 10 years, I've become more and more thinking, but I also want a job, a role where it's bigger than me, where I can make a difference, where I feel that I can shape things and make a difference. That's a leadership role where I can, be part of leading teams, of making a difference for the teams and the business. And I would say that has been further strengthened over the last few years. And now as CEO, it takes on a completely new level, because I mean, I've really had this job in a short time. This bank here, and we're in the middle of Copenhagen looking out here. This building here is 150. I mean, we moved into this building before telephones were invented, right? Before the light bulb was invented, right? So you're all of a sudden, you're just a part of history in a different ways. And you're like, I'm just here for I have the privilege of being here for a short period of time. And then I think purpose comes even out stronger, because you're like, my purpose is to really help give this bank on to someone else in a better shape, and to be remembered for helping do that, right? And that's this transformation, and hopefully also the transformation that's still to come. And for me, that gives me a lot of purpose and energy.
I mean, there's three things that stand out for me in your answer that I find very interesting. The first one, where you said, quite honestly, when you were a younger guy, like if when you thought about purpose, it was quite. I mean, you wouldn't have even used the word purpose.
No.
You'd have just said, "This is what I want," and all quite reasonable. But when you reflect on it, quite self-orientated. And so the first thing about purpose is you're noticing it actually holds something bigger than yourself. It's bigger than you, and you want to shape things and make a difference for something that's bigger than you. So that was the first thing I heard you said. I mean, the second thing I heard was this thing, which I think really does relate to purpose as well, is it's kind of like a longer view. It's like you were talking about, here we are, we're sitting in a room, and the bank came here before the light bulbs were in, you having that sense of time and actually having a purpose to pass this on, this on in a way that's, better than when you found it, that will serve a new generation.
Yeah.
And then the third thing you spoke about, which, I think is really interesting about purpose, is when you're connected to it, when you have that, you use the word right at the end, you said energy. Like it gives you more energy when you've got that. Yeah. And I'm assuming that that's a really important part of how you manage your energy.
It is. And look, I tell my colleagues here that all the time. When we actually launched our new purpose for Danske Bank just the week after I became CEO, I'd been part of building it as part of the executive leadership team as well. And one of the things where I think it really gets put on edge is if you have a business that's been through a lot of issues and challenges, and you, for example, have our colleagues out in the branch network that every single day had to listen to customers say, "What's wrong with you guys now? Now you're in the newspaper again." If you can go home in the evening and think to yourself, "Yeah, but I'm making a difference for these customers by helping them with a mortgage or saving or helping a business go on the stock market," and then you wake up next morning, you say, "That is my to help these customers, it makes sense," then you're much more likely to go through some of these challenges than not. And that's where the energy comes in, that extra energy, because actually what you're doing, you believe in it, it makes a difference, and it helps you get through those sort of ups and downs that are inevitable.
You're making here that key point, aren't you? I mean, the bank's got its purpose, and you can tell us what it is, please do.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't have that connection to people coming in every day working, it's just a bunch of words, isn't it? You've got to have that connectivity.
Yes. Yeah. And and our purpose, sort of shortly, we talk about how we help unleash the potential in our customers through the power of finance in a sustainable way. And then if you take that to the person sitting in the branch, well, the power of finance is that savings product or that mortgage or helping customers think through inflation, higher interest rates, what should I do, where should I save, and that's really important stuff, right? I mean, and that's why, in so many ways we touch the lives of people every day, because your banking, your savings, your money, it's one of the most important things for you, right? So I agree, taking it from top to how you deal with that and work with that every day is really important, and bringing it to life, I think, makes a difference.
What have you practically done to help people make that connection from, the purpose of the bank to my purpose here, working with customers, serving customers? Have you done anything to help that process, or is it just something that's naturally there anyway?
I think it's two things. I think it's definitely the job as leadership to be out there telling the stories, just like I'm doing here with you, linking the purpose to what we do, to how it makes a difference, coming with examples, encouragement, and that can be town halls, social media. I met a CEO when I just took over, and we were talking about, he'd taken over as CEO 13 years before me, and we were talking about the importance of engagement, communication, and we were talking about like social media, videos. The way you can communicate, get the message out today versus 13 years ago is like times 1,000, right? So I think there's a lot you can do by communication, telling stories through different channels. But I think you also need to sort of embed it more in processes. So just as a small example, we've launched a quarterly award, which we call the Pundus Award, after Pundus is a mascot that we use in the bank, which is all about awarding stories of colleagues or teams that live our cultural commitments. And our cultural commitments is around how we team up, how we own it, and how we're open. And that then links back to our purpose. So that's just one example. One thing is communication, being out there, talk about. Another thing is what can you actually also institutionalize, whether it's awards, quarterly awards, whether it's how you look at personal development plans. So we look both at the what you're doing as well as the how you're doing it. And the how you're doing it, that's all about the cultural commitments and how you bring those to life. So I think you need to do both.
This has been a big part of your efforts, hasn't it, in the last couple of years, to say we're not going to take the culture here for granted. We're actually going to, it's quite a bold thing, you're going to define it. We're going to say these three things matter to us. This is how we're going to do business with each other and with our customers. So you've really been specific to name those three things. And like you're saying, it's like how you figure it out in a way, you know, whether it's award schemes or something else, is less important in some ways. What you're saying to people is this is what matters.
That's right.
And that comes through in the way you're appraising people, in the way you're communicating, the stories that get celebrated around here.
And I think it's, you know, I think many organizations, of course, talk about purpose and culture, right? And I've worked in organizations where it's incredibly deep-rooted, and I've also worked in organizations where it was less deep-rooted. And there are some things that are really deeply rooted here at Danske Bank already. Despite having ups and downs, there is such a strong focus on our customers. There is, especially here in Denmark, a proudness, despite everything, of working for the bank. But then when you then think about, okay, but what is it that we need for the next 5-10 years? And what is it we need to hold on to and continue doing? That's fine, you continue doing that, but what is it that you need to change? And so when we said, look, teaming up, owning it, and being open, we said, well, these are three things that we really think we need to do even better. We need to do more of it. And that's why I think it's important not to think about culture as something that's static, that then it has to be that forever. It's also important to think, what is it that we need to change now? What is it that we need to do even better? And Team Up was all about how do we work together more across this big bank, across the different silos we had. Owning it was a lot about, look, how do we take even more ownership for changing things, more accountability? And Be Open was a lot around also coming out from some of the bad cases we've had. How do we really raise things up? Danske Bank was a bit known as being sort of a bit top down, a bit, you know, autocratic is probably going too far, but a bit top down, a bit sort of like, you know, what should I share with management? What shouldn't I? And stuff like that. And just encouraging, look, be open. If you see things, talk about it. How do we get it fixed, etc. So telling the stories around why these cultural commitments, why now, why is it different, how does it fit in with the context that we're in, I think is really important. And then, you know, we measure this through like employee engagement surveys, right? And when I look at the employee engagement survey from the last 2 years, I mean, we went from 71, 76 overall. But when you look at things like purpose, cultural commitments, we see even bigger strides. So my point is, I think you can actually change things in a relatively short period of time if you're focused on it, if you have, you know, people with you, if you have the leadership with you.
What part do you think working with purpose? You're talking about animating the culture through these three things. And you actually said it's really important to not just identify them, but give people the purpose, why these, you know, there's a purpose behind these. But I'm just curious about how working with purpose, you think specifically is helping these cultural commitments come to life more.
Look, I think actually it comes through very strongly especially when you speak with the younger generation, because when you speak with a younger generation And I give you some examples, like being out speaking with students that are currently at the university but have student jobs here, which I was the other day. We had actually focused on sort of a women's network on students who have student works here who are thinking about coming into the bank. Or when I speak with colleagues, I try to do sort of like monthly breakfast meetings with different parts of the colleague population, so to speak. When I speak with the younger parts of that, they really care about purpose. And they don't always talk about purpose, but they talk about what difference are we making to the green transition? How are we thinking about mental health and stress, and how do we take that into account when we run the organization? So I actually think that particularly the younger generation talk even more about purpose, being purpose driven. They may use different words, but it comes down to, I want a place to work where I can make a difference, and also where I feel I can be myself and I'm part of something bigger. So I think it's a critical must that and look, it's different from organizations, what makes sense and stuff like that. And what's really important is it doesn't take away from, at the end of the day, of course, leadership is about creating results, and we need to create results. And we're quoted on the stock exchange, and our owners have. But it's about, do you believe that you will perform better if you have the best people that are engaged, motivated, that feel that they're part of this, that really buy into it? Absolutely, I have no doubt.
It's very compelling what you're saying, particularly in you talk about, you hear about it in the younger generation. They may not use the word purpose, but they want to know what impact the bank is having on these important issues, the environment, sustainability, the way women are brought into the workplace, and how they're acknowledged for their contributions. So they have these purposes running in them. One of the subjects that's come up in these talks a lot is the emergence of a conversation where the classic shareholder model of business is starting to be challenged. And I don't think we're at a point where we've got an alternative to that, but I think we're in the process of it. Do you notice a tension between being purpose-led and maintaining or maximizing shareholder value?
Well, I would answer it in this way, is that I think as CEO, you have to be very careful that you don't let your owners to believe that purpose is something fluffy, and that you just talk about, grand things and stuff like that. At the end of the day, the owner wants to know that you're focused on returns, market share, winning in the marketplace. And I truly believe that by doing all those things, you also need to have a purpose-driven company where you actually have the best people, where you have an inclusive environment. And there's loads of studies, right, that say, for example, if you have a more diverse workforce, performance will be, 30-35% more. So there's loads of evidence that speaks to that, but I think there is an important balance about how you link purpose, inclusion with performance. And I think finding that balance and the connections is really, really important. Having said that, you're not going to find a return on ROI of an initiative on rolling out new cultural commitments, right? You really have to believe in it. You have to believe that it's going to, pay back, right?
Do you think in that sense, purpose is a tool or is a way of working that leads to more returns? Or do you think it's something that gets held in a more broad way, that you've got purposes, some of which are about shareholder returns, but some of which are about your customers, some of which are about your people, some of which are about the community that you serve? How do you hold that? Because I know leaders can hold that in quite different ways.
No, I take it back to, we're 152 years old. Our purpose that we launched a couple of years ago unleashing potential in our customers through the power of finance in a sustainable way, I think I could probably have said that 152 years ago.
Yeah.
So what we do in terms of unleashing potential in our customers through what we do has actually always been the same in my mind.
Yeah.
But I think continually to remind ourselves of that and then telling the stories. I mean, I tell you a story. One of the first customer meetings I had, it was in north of Jutland. Owner of a pretty successful Danish company. He sat me down and he told me about how his grandfather had gotten a 7,000 kroner, 1,000-pound loan. This was maybe in the 40s. And he had the check in his pocket. He was from the local branch. He was walking up the hill and he was thinking, should I really start this business? I've just had a new family. I'm an engineer. Maybe I could play it safe. I can get a job. And this third generation business owner is telling me, he said, because Danske Bank believed in me, because they gave me this loan, I'm going to start my business. I mean, that is purpose, right? And that links to the purpose. And those are real stories that make a difference, right? Those things resonate. And that's about shareholder value, right? Yeah. I mean, this customer is with us today, right? Almost 100 years later.
Yeah.
And that customer will never leave Danske Bank. I'm sure of it.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
It does bring it back. It brings it back to the essence of banking, doesn't it? Which is at its essence, really, it's about serving customers.
Yes. And that trust, that relationship you build over time, right? Yeah. Being there through all the cycles and believing, right?
So this particular challenge you face with coming into the bank and it being really in the turmoil of the money laundering, I'm guessing the viewers are going to be quite interested in how you, in a sense, not make sure, but do whatever you can to not have that happening again. I mean, can you see purpose playing a role in that, in that sort of building a bank which is much more careful, much more likely to raise its hand if it sees something that might not be quite right or might not be quite fitting with the regulations because you're such a regulated industry. Do you see a link there in that process?
Yeah, I do, and this is something that we've really talked a lot about in the bank, because in many ways, when things like this happen, biggest money laundering scandal of all time, as quoted by the newspaper, whether it really is irrelevant. It's a big case. It moves the pendulum in terms of compliance, risk management, needing to ensure it never happens again. And you could say compliance and financial crime in some extent is newer. We didn't talk about that 150 years ago. The dangers of money laundering, right? Credit risk has always been an issue. So do I get my money back? And doing the credit analysis and that's an important part of risk management. It's always been. People don't ask, why you do credit analysis, right? It's a natural thing. You do it. It's a really important part. Compliance, financial crime needs and has become a much more integrated part of customer analysis, just like credit risk was. And why I tell that story is, and you could argue today, doing ESG analysis and CO2 emissions and do you have a robust climate plan is increasingly become part of that as well. So the reason I say that is that going back to, if you really want to unleash potential in your customers, then you need to know your customers. You need to not only know credit, you need to know the compliance, the financial crime, the ESG profile. That's how we can help you as a customer in the best way possible. And therefore, going back to, is it okay to talk about compliance, risk, being careful? Absolutely, because at the end of the day, if banking is all about trust, and as you may know, credit is also coming from a Latin word around trust. then it's okay. But then you really have to position it, tell the story that way, explain why it is you do what you do. Then, of course, there's always a balance, the pendulum swing around, okay, but how do you make sure that you do it in a good commercial way, in a speedy way, in a way where you communicate ongoing and stuff like that.
Got it. It's very clear to me. So, I mean, let's change tack a bit. You've probably, Carsten, got a reasonable claim on being Denmark's busiest person. You know, but one thing I know about you is that you personally invest quite a bit of your time into purpose coaching, into having time, which is very personal to you, about how you do your job and what purposes that serves. Could you tell us a bit about that, why you do it and what your experience of it is?
You know, I probably for the last 15 years or so, I've had a coach. And, you know, it kind of started with the normal, like, career discussions you have with HR and your manager. Okay, development needs, what should you do? Okay, get a coach and you can help work on some of these things, get your presentation skills better, you know, manage your fears of failure better, think about how you can communicate better with stakeholders, or whatever it may be that you work with your coach on. I heard the other day, I think that like all top 100 tennis players in the world have coaches, right? And they have that because they help them become continually better, but also mindset. Because one of the tougher things in the game of tennis is mindset. You're out there alone on the court, right? So I think there's both something around skill sets, but I think most of it, I've increasingly now appreciated personally, at least, is about mindset. Mm-hmm. So whereas 15 years ago, it may have started about how do you hone your communication skills, for me now it's all about mindset. And it's incredible how some of the same challenges and problem statements come up again and again for me. And by talking those through with a coach, by getting a different view on things, how it can completely change the way you see things. And what that at the end of the day does for me is it makes me much more of an effective leader. Is if I can take some of those things, figure out where, you know, where I'm wasting energy on stuff, or if there are things I can do another way that would get to a better, faster, quicker outcome, and that I feel good about it, that's a real a big game changer for my leadership, for what I can give back to the organization, which is at the end of the day what it's about, how I can be the best leader for the organization and for my colleagues in the organization.
So you're saying for you that, I mean, you've invested in your own coaching for 15 years, like, you know, every top tennis player. And in fact, I think they have multiple coaches, don't they? They have physical training.
Yeah, exactly. That's true.
But what you're saying is like the big transition for you is your focus used to be in the early days on your skill sets, whereas now your focus is on mindset.
Yes.
I mean, it's very clear the way you say that, skill set to mindset.
Yes.
And then what you're noticing in that work on mindset is you're noticing massive benefits in your efficiency, where your energy is going, how much energy gets wasted. Am I getting
Absolutely.
you? Okay. I mean, could you give us an example of, you know, where your mindset shift?
Yeah, it's because it maybe seems quite obvious, mindset and working with your mindset makes a lot of sense, right? But what I've found now in the last 2 years as CEO is, you know, going through the challenges and the struggles that you go through as a CEO and as a leader other places and as a tennis player and wherever you are, it's as these challenges come up and as you struggle with what decisions should you take and how is this impacting my sleep, my personal life, my family life, whatever, it's as you work through those challenges that you really start appreciating what it can do. And I think it's maybe one example for me is that, I remember starting my CEO job, and I was speaking, Darren, with you as my coach, about this is really brutal, and I've done all these things this week, and it's a brutal experience, and I'm getting by, but and then taking a step back and say, okay, but brutal, what does that really mean, and why is it brutal? And in this case, a lot of it comes back to because I was very focused on, and I still am focused on performance, but maybe in a different way. I'm changing my mindset to, well, how can you be focused on performance, but in a mindset where you're doing the best you can, as opposed to in a mindset where you're focused on, showing somebody something. So that's just one concrete example, but it could be many other things. And you only really get to that self-realization, whatever it is for yourself, by going through these struggles and challenges.
No, absolutely. It makes sense. I think, when you first came into the job and we would have the conversations and you were using the brutal word, it was like, to me, your mindset was a bit like one of these, Tour de France cyclists or something. I mean, you were really accustomed to the kind of brutal hard work, weren't you? Toughing it out. And your experience sometimes of a working week was, I'm through it. We got this tick, 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 but the experience was quite brutal, almost like you were accustomed to going through the pain of the job.
Yeah.
And then we started looking at, okay, is that going to last you for the next, 15 years or whatever it is you want to give to this?
Yeah.
And you were quite clear, weren't you? That I don't want this experience to be brutal. I want to actually.
You want to actually try to enjoy as much of it as possible, right?
Yeah, right.
And that's where mindset, I think, really changes how you look at it. And you don't want to be looking forward to Friday every Monday, right? I don't, because I actually enjoy what I'm doing, right?
Yeah. One of the things that we got into, and I'm wondering if you could share some of your reflections on this, is you were talking about, and I think it's very common, I think the viewer will really recognize it, this combination of things that can lead to a lot of stress, which is you're very performance orientated and you're focusing a lot of energy on the outcome. But a lot of those outcomes, as most outcomes are beyond your control. So there you've got this unique combination of things. You're focusing on an outcome, you really want it really matters, and it's beyond your control. And all those things adding up to a heap of stress.
Yes.
Do you as I'm saying that to you now, do you recognize that formula almost as it is? And what have you done to shift that formula? Because I'm sure there are people watching this who recognize that very, very intimately.
Yeah, but I think that's a classic one, right? And if you're like us, a public quoted company, every quarter you go out with financial results. Every quarter, the media, the analysts, the shareholders, the board are looking at it. And of course you want to deliver great results, and of course you want to go out with a good story, and of course you want to continue to show that you're performing. But if you're always focused on how you're going to make others do something, how do you make competition out there go slower than you? Or, how do you convince a customer that they need to do something? Or how do you convince a newspaper that they need to write something different about you? Then you're really going to have an uphill battle, right? Because you cannot control all those things, right? And so shifting towards being more focused on what can you actually do? What do you have control of as a CEO, as a team? And then at the end of the day, link it back to, can you look yourself in the mirror and say you've done your best, right? You've done the best you could in terms of that customer discussion or that media discussion or that issue with competition. I think that's hugely important. And that's not easy, right? I struggle with that every day. I go back and forth between the the states. And you continue, and I continue to remind myself of, what do I have control of? Where can I make a difference? Where is it within my own grasp? Am I doing, the best I can? And that for me is a huge changer in terms of sort of mindset and how I feel about the bank's delivery, my own delivery, and how I come to work.
No, I get it. It really speaks to me of the difference in the conversations we've had over the years, where at first the conversation was very much about, right, well, I want to get that result, or I want this person or this shareholder or this stakeholder to think this about me, or to think this about the bank or about the executive team. And what I notice with you now is that your attention is much more on, what's my purpose in this engagement?
Yeah.
What's my aim? But which is not the same as an outcome, which people often get confused about, don't they?
Yes.
But actually, so my purpose in this is to be really authentic, or to share the story as honestly as I can, or to, as you say, you often come back to give this my best shot, to do the best I can with it. That those purposes seem to make quite a difference in your energy and how you use your energy.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think at the end of the day, I have spent a lot of energy thinking about outcomes that I cannot control. And so if it really comes down to it, it's sort of, how do you minimize the energy you use? I think it actually goes back to, I don't know if it was Churchill, what it was, the old saying around, the old friend, I was sitting at the deathbed, and what was the one thing you regretted? And it was, worrying about all the things that never came true, right?
Yeah.
But it is a bit like that, right? Worrying about and using energy on a lot of things that you can't control, and trying to shift the mindset to things that you can control, things where you can make a difference.
Yeah.
And again, it sounds simple, but if you don't go through, at least I feel, without having gone through all the examples of, having to course correct, having to change the way I do it, having to think about it, discussing it, then I would have been another place. Then I would probably still be much more prone to going out on different decisions, or going out on different angles where where I didn't have that tool set with me, so to speak.
Yeah. Because you are very, very mindful, aren't you, about yourself as an energy unit. I mean, there's your role is big enough to cover 3, 4, 5 of you easily, isn't it? I mean, it's a massive scope. But you are very, very mindful about use of energy, where you put your energy, and keeping your energy sustainable, almost like thinking of yourself as a sustainable, unit. Don't mean to call you a unit, but you know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
A sustainable source of energy. Because, could you give the viewer a sense about how you are managing your energy, what choices you make so that you can, show up at your best, or have the energy, because your schedule is, it's astonishing, isn't it? How much is going and how much you're at, but you show up with an energy and a vitality. Yeah. So I just wonder if you could share some of how you approach that.
And this is so important, right? That I, as a person, I, as a CEO, I need to make sure that I get my sort of personal life and job life and the things I like doing all to sort of work in a bigger sort of universe, so to speak, right? And one of the biggest challenges taking over the CEO role, in fact, for me, was to figure out, how do I spend my time? and then still have time for my wife, my family. I have two, pretty young kids. I have a daughter who is handicapped. She needs extra attention as well. I have friends. I have some sports I like to do. So how do you get it all to sort of work? And you can't do everything. So when you say how do you get it all to work, you have to make choices. But for me, it's things like I tell my secretary I don't want to do more than 2 things during the week in the evening. Of course, things can come in the way, but in general, I get up in the morning, I do some sports, sometimes with a friend of mine, we go for a run. I take calls in the morning when I go to work, some days during the week. That's great, you can do that now with Teams and things like that, so that I can drop my son off. The nights where I don't have stuff for work, I come home, I have dinner, I put my daughter to bed, and it's sort of small things like that for me are really big things and really matter for my energy levels and my sort of, and I think work-life balance is different for everybody. For me, there is not a one work-life balance. Work-life balance for you, Darren, is different than it is for me. It's different than it is for a third and fourth point. So you have to make a decision on what does it mean for you, what works for you. But I would definitely say that if you don't get it to work, then you cannot, just like an athlete, a tennis player, if you're not eating right, if you're not getting your sleep and then you're not going to perform at your best. And that's the same being a CEO.
Yeah. So you've got it down quite to the micro details of what you eat, how you sleep, the choices you make, how you figure it out for your situation with your kids and family at the age they are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, for me at least, I at least need to be quite regimented about it, and not a lot of days are different in terms of when I get up, when I go to bed, what I do.
Yeah.
the content during the day is totally different every day. Absolutely. But there are some things that are the same.
Yeah. And you're regimented because your purpose is what, would you say?
It is going back to the purpose of, because I want to be able to contribute to this bank, to this job, to give it over in a better place. And I know that I can't, deliver my best both as a CEO and as a dad and as a friend unless that kind of works. And as I said, that's different for me than it is for anyone else, right? But
so Carsten, earlier on, you were saying that you think getting an executive team to function around you is like really massively important part of this whole transformation that you're in. Can you talk to us about how you've approached that and what role purpose is playing in the working of your executive team?
Yeah. In many ways, I think there is not a much bigger thing I can do as CEO than to build the team that leads this bank. And that has to be a team that basically can help bring this bank to the next stage, as we spoke about, that can transform, that can perform, that can build the trust, that can build the followership. And I think that's a big challenge as a leader, and for me as a leader, is building a team that's diverse, that has different views, that trusts each other. And that takes time, and that takes a lot of investment. And one of from the get-go, actually, we had help as a team, right? We had help from Mind at Work to talk about how we lead ourselves, how we lead others, the context we lead in. Spend a lot of time together. First, I think focused a lot on building trust, and then focused a lot on how we work together as a team. So there is definitely something about the teamwork aspect, the building trust. Then there is a lot about how do you also get that working into your daily routines, right? What are the things that you can do? Simple things like, checking in as part of our weekly leadership meeting. So just spending time going around the room, asking, how are you doing? How are you feeling, right? And so you sort of get a feel of where are we all, right? And all those things, I think, play back to purpose, because if we're not setting examples, if we're not talking about leadership and the importance of leadership, if we're not talking about how we need to lead ourselves and bringing examples to life, how are we going to get the rest of the leadership to do it, and how are we then going to get the rest of the organization to do it? So I think that's a really important part of it. And that for me is definitely a journey, whatever you want to call it, right? That takes time and takes a lot of investment and commitment. And the ongoing challenge is always, how do we get time for everything? How do we get time to spend time just as a team on leadership, and on how we transform, and on how we perform, and with the board, and with our customers, right? Yeah. So you really need to take some decisions around really truly investing in it, right? And then all being bought in to do it.
I mean, one of the things that you've invested in as a leadership team is managing your state, showing up in a way where you're in a purposeful state. Yep. You're not showing up reactive, which is easy to do, isn't it? And often we don't even know when we're reactive. So can you talk to us about what you've noticed about the difference between a team operating when it's being purposeful and a team operating when it's reactive?
First of all, one of the things that has really come out, now we've done this for a couple of years together, is how I actually notice in my team members, and my team members note in me, which state of mind we're in. Are we in a reactive state, or are we in a more purposeful state, calling each other out on it? And just that in itself is a huge help, right? We take a step back, oh yeah, you're right. And so that's one thing. And there's just no question that when the team is in a state where we're all sort of thinking as enterprise leaders, and thinking in a state where we have more energy, where we're more focused on, okay, the purpose, what is it we need to do together here?
Yes.
The energy levels, the efficiency, the effectiveness, how others see us is just next to none, right? You can't compare it. And that's, of course, the power of this, is if you can, because you're always going to go back and forth, I think, right? Yeah. If it was easy, everybody would do it. You invest in it 2 years, you're done, right? But this is something you invest in forever. You come better and better. You call each other out, and so on and so forth. And then it starts living, right? Yeah. And people see it, and colleagues talk about it, and so on.
One of the things that you spoke about as a team was being sharper with accountability and getting more clarity into the way your ways of working, as well as other things like commitment and other things. But could you speak a bit about that, gaining clarity as an executive team? Because it sounds like an obvious point, but it takes more work than just saying it, doesn't it?
Hugely. Yeah, we talked about, how do you give clarity? How do you get ownership, and how do you build commitment, right? And the clarity in my mind, and you can use many other words, how do you set a clear direction for the company? What is it that you want to do, right? And if you cannot say that in a very easy way, in a purposeful manner, where you really believe it in a way that others can understand it, then it's not clear, then it's not clarity, and then it's tough to get, people behind you. So, we spend a lot of time also challenging each other on, is the story clear? Does it make sense? Will this give the direction needed? Will the analyst buy into it? Will the media buy into it? Will the board buy into it? And importantly, will our colleagues buy into it? And as you say, that's, it's the old adage about, look, if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter, right?
Yeah. I think that is Winston Churchill.
Yeah.
But I think he maybe took it from somebody else originally anyway.
Mark Twain, I think. But anyway.
Was it Mark Twain? Yeah. Great. Well, I mean, you're obviously personally very committed to connecting to your purpose. You're very committed to doing the work on your own mindset that has you showing up that way. But we know that not everybody in a leadership team or in a leadership community, because you're really talking about a very broad, you're talking about thousands of people here, aren't you, who lead in this bank. What's your approach to those who find that inner work more challenging? They're less open to looking at their mindset. How do you think about that now that you're a couple of years into this journey?
You know what? I would say that that was definitely one of the things I was nervous about, questionable about, on, how would this be taken by the team? We've rolled it out to our top 100 leaders. I have not met anyone who said this isn't worthwhile or this doesn't make sense. So I'm not at all in a space where I'm in the space where I think pretty much everybody can be convinced that this is useful, this is important, and it's even a game changer if you really want to lead an organization and be your best. And so I think that's where I am. Is I have no doubt. I'm glass half full that you can get everybody on board here, and some require a little bit more time, but I actually don't see a lot of skeptics on this.
Yeah. So 2 years in, you feel more convinced that, it's interesting, the word game changer. It's a great word in a way, because that's what you're trying to do here, isn't it? You're trying to really change the way this bank's operating. Yes. In some ways by going back to its essence, the heart of its purpose, what it was created to do.
Yes.
But what I'm hearing really clearly from you is that response, that personal responsibility for your own state and for being clear about your purpose, both individually and then as teams when you're working together, when you team up together, to use your bank's language. That to you is central to your leadership and what you're doing here.
Yes.
Thank you, Carsten.